I sat cross-legged on the thin mattress in my childhood bedroom, the faded posters peeling off the walls, feeling like a guest in a life I no longer recognized. My laptop sat open beside me, the screen glowing with a single line. College fund balance, $46,320.12. My hands trembled as I hovered over the transfer button. Downstairs, voices rattled through the house. Dad cursing at the kitchen table, Mom crying softly in the living room, another urgent family meeting about overdue bills, collection letters piling up like tombstones in the mailbox. They hadn't asked me outright. Not yet. But the expectation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a storm about to break. 6 months ago, I had been planning dorm decorations, campus tours, meeting future roommates. I had spent years dreaming of leaving this small, suffocating town behind, of becoming the first in my family to earn a college degree. But somewhere between Dad losing his job and Mom racking up debt on a dozen credit cards, those dreams shriveled into something less tangible, something disposable. "Lily, we need to talk," Dad barked from the bottom of the stairs. His voice had that edge again, the one that left no room for arguments, no room for Lily's dreams. I swallowed hard, clicking the laptop closed. It was only money, I told myself. I could defer college a year, maybe two, save up again. Dreams could wait, family couldn't. I found them both in the kitchen, Mom still clutching a crumpled tissue, Dad pacing like a caged animal. The table was covered in bills, final notices stamped in angry red ink. "You're almost 18, Dad started without preamble, voice hard and businesslike. "You live under our roof. We need help." Mom sniffled, her hands wringing the tissue into shreds. "We never wanted it to come to this, sweetie, but it's bad. Real bad." I nodded slowly, heart hammering so loudly in my chest I barely heard my own voice. "I can help," I said. "I'll figure something out." I didn't mention the fund. Not yet. Maybe I was still hoping, somewhere deep inside, that they'd stop me, that they'd remember what it was for, that they'd tell me no, that my future mattered more than their mistakes. But no one asked. No one even looked at me long enough to see the hesitation swimming in my eyes. That night, while they watched TV downstairs, laughing too loudly at a sitcom they'd already seen 100 times, I transferred every last cent from my college fund into their joint account. $46,320.12. Gone in under 5 minutes. I sat on the floor of my bedroom afterward, staring at the blank laptop screen, feeling like I'd just sawed off a piece of myself and handed it over without anesthesia. Still, I told myself, it was for the right reasons. Family first. Always. The next morning, Dad slammed his coffee mug down so hard the table shook. "That's it?" he barked after checking the bank account on his phone. 46 grand? That's barely a dent in what we owe. I blinked at him, stunned. $46,000. A fortune in my eyes, reduced to barely a dent in less than a second. "That was my college fund," I whispered, voice so small it barely made it across the kitchen. Dad's eyes narrowed, cold and sharp. "Then you should have done better, should have gotten scholarships, should have thought about the family first." I stumbled backward, the words hitting harder than any slap could have. "You're dead to us," Dad barked, the vein in his forehead throbbing, his voice echoing against the cheap kitchen tile. Mom didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring down at the bills, like maybe if she didn't look at me, I'd disappear completely. I left the house that morning without another word. Walked for miles, past the gas stations, the shuttered factories, the sagging porches. The whole town looked tired, like it had been waiting for too long for a miracle that never came. I sat on a rusted bench outside the post office and cried. Not loud, messy sobs, just quiet tears that slid down without permission, blurring everything in front of me. They were supposed to be proud of me. They were supposed to protect me. Instead, I had gutted my own future trying to save theirs, and all I got in return was an excommunication, That was the first crack. The first time I realized love, real love, doesn't demand you bleed yourself dry. It was the moment the pedestal I had placed my parents on began to crumble. And deep down, even then, I knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred into a strange, hollow routine. I woke up each morning to the sound of Dad banging around the kitchen, barking orders at Mom like they were soldiers trapped in a war none of them understood. I kept my head down, doing small jobs around town, waiting tables, delivering groceries, anything to scrape together a few dollars. The money from my college fund was long gone, and yet the problems it was supposed to solve didn't disappear. If anything, they multiplied. One evening, as I trudged up the porch steps after a double shift at the diner, I heard the phone ring inside. The shrill sound echoed through the house like a siren. Then came Mom's voice, high-pitched, desperate. "I told you we're working on it." She snapped into the receiver. "I said we'd send something next week." There was a pause. Then Mom's voice dropped into a whisper, tight and choked. "No, you can't call here again, please." I stood frozen just outside the door, my sweaty palms gripping the chipped wood. A cold realization slid down my spine. Collectors. When she finally hung up, I pushed open the door slowly. Mom was standing in the living room, shoulders slumped, her phone dangling from limp fingers. Her eyes flickered toward me, startled, almost guilty. But she said nothing. Just tucked the phone into the pocket of her cardigan and hurried into the kitchen. They hadn't told me the full truth. Not about the debts. Not about how deep the hole was. I set my bag down and followed her. "Was that about the bills?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom busied herself wiping an already clean counter. "It's nothing for you to worry about, honey," she said too quickly. "Go rest. You've been working so hard." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. The weight in my chest was growing heavier by the day, but every time I tried to talk about it, it felt like stepping into quicksand. A week later, another call came. This time, I picked it up. "Lily Reynolds." A deep, bored-sounding voice crackled through the line. "This is Allied Collections. We're calling regarding an outstanding balance associated with your address." I froze. I'm not responsible for those debts," I stammered. The man didn't miss a beat. "Maybe not legally, but you're listed as a secondary contact. If payment isn't made soon, actions will escalate." I hung up, my hands trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped from my grip. Secondary contact? When had they listed me as that? I stormed into the kitchen where Dad sat with a beer in one hand and the remote in the other, flipping lazily through channels. "Were you going to tell me?" I demanded, voice shaking. He barely looked at me. "Tell you what? That you put my name down for your debts? That collectors are calling me now?" He grunted, setting his beer down with a thud. "You live here. You're part of this family. It's your responsibility, too." I took a step back, feeling like I'd been slapped. "My responsibility," I whispered. "I gave up college for you. I emptied my future for you." Dad stood up suddenly, towering over me, face red. "You think that makes you better than us? You think you're some saint because you threw a few bucks around?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. Mom stepped into the doorway, looking between us like a deer caught in headlights. "Lily, please," she said softly. "You're upsetting your father." I let out a bitter laugh. Upsetting him. All I had ever done was clean up their messes, patch up their mistakes, and smile through it. And still, somehow, I was the villain. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. "I'm going out," I muttered, voice cracking. Dad barked after me. "Don't bother coming back if you're going to act like this." The door slammed behind me, rattling the frame. I walked aimlessly through the darkening streets, the streetlights flickering overhead like dying fireflies. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the betrayal was seeping into my bones. How could they look me in the eye and act like I owed them more? How could they use my love, my loyalty, like a weapon against me? I sank onto a bench outside the gas station, staring blankly at the cracked asphalt. This wasn't family. Family didn't gut your future and then spit at you for bleeding. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through old emails from colleges, acceptance letters, scholarship offers. All the things I had traded away like poker chips. For what? Another call buzzed through. Unknown number. Without thinking, I answered. This is Allied Collections. The same bored voice droned. Final notice before legal action. I hung up without a word, the finality of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. This was bigger than unpaid bills. This was about trust, love, and how easy it was to lose both when money entered the equation. I leaned back against the bench, staring at the bruised sky above, and for the first time, a thought settled in my mind. Quiet and fierce. I'm not going to save them again. Not this time. And deep inside, something began to shift. Something that no amount of guilt or blood ties could undo. The silent price had been paid, and now it was time for them to face the cost. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Dad yelling into the phone again. It was like living inside a war zone where every morning started with artillery fire. His voice boomed through the thin walls of the house, ugly and sharp. I told you, we're working on it. Stop harassing us. Mom's voice floated in next, brittle and breaking. No, please, give us a little more time. We have family helping us. Family. The word made my stomach churn. I pulled the blanket over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, as if hiding would make it all disappear. The debt, the broken promises, the mountain of guilt pressing down on me. By the time I dragged myself downstairs, the kitchen looked like a crime scene. Bills were scattered across the table, phone cords tangled, sticky notes with frantic scribbles plastered on every surface. Mom stood at the counter, clutching a mug of cold coffee, her face pale and drawn. Lily, she said quietly, without turning around. Can you sit down? The hair on the back of my neck prickled. Nothing good ever followed that tone. I pulled out a chair and sat, the wooden seat cold against my skin. She took a deep breath, finally facing me. Her eyes were swollen from crying. They're threatening legal action, she whispered. If we don't make a payment soon, they'll start garnishing wages, maybe even repossessing the car. I said nothing. Mom set her coffee down with a shaky hand. We were thinking, maybe you could... No, I said, cutting her off before she could finish. Her mouth snapped shut in surprise, like she hadn't even considered the possibility that I might say no. I already gave everything I had, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I have nothing left. Mom blinked rapidly, as if trying to blink away the reality in front of her. But you're working now, right? Even a little? Every little bit helps. I stared at her, stunned. How easy it was for them to keep reaching for more, even when there was nothing left to take. I'm saving for a tiny apartment, I said, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. I'm trying to start over. Mom shook her head slowly, disappointment flickering across her face. Start over? Lily, we're your family. You don't turn your back on family. I stood up so fast the chair screeched against the floor. You turned your back on me the second you drained my future without even saying thank you, I snapped. The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Mom opened her mouth to respond, but the phone rang again, slicing through the tension like a blade. She snatched it up without even looking at me. Hello? She answered breathlessly. A pause. Then her face crumpled. No, we can't pay right now, she said, her voice trembling. But my daughter, she's helping us. She's responsible. She'll fix this. I stood there, frozen, listening to her sell my life away one sentence at a time. When she finally hung up, she turned to me, exhausted but expectant. You'll help, right? I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out the front door. Outside, the late afternoon sun was setting, throwing long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Everything looked broken. Our house, our lives, even the light. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The balance was pitiful, barely enough for 2 months' rent if I was careful. I thought about all the shifts I had picked up, all the nights spent wiping tables and bagging groceries until my feet ached. And they still thought of me as a walking solution, not a person. The next day, Mom cornered me again. "I don't understand why the collectors keep calling," she said, wringing her hands. "You used your college fund to help, right? Then why are they still after us?" I stared at her for a long moment. And that's when I knew. They had no idea how money worked. They had no plan. They hadn't used my savings wisely. They had thrown it into the bottomless pit of old debts, late fees, penalties, and reckless spending. They thought I could be milked forever. They thought I was endless. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Maybe," I said slowly, "because no matter how much I give, it's never enough to fix a system that's already broken." Mom blinked at me, confusion clouding her face. "Lily." "No," I interrupted. "You want to know why the collectors keep calling? Because throwing money at a sinking ship doesn't stop it from sinking. It just delays the inevitable." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "I'm not a Band-Aid," I said, voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "I'm not a loan you never plan to repay. I'm not the rescue plan you pull out every time you mess up." Mom's face crumpled. She sank into the nearest chair like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. I didn't feel satisfaction, just an endless aching sadness. "You're my daughter," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "And you were supposed to protect me, not use me." And with those words, a wall I hadn't even known was still standing between us finally shattered. I turned and walked away, not looking back. For the first time in my life, I was no longer carrying guilt that wasn't mine. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The real reckoning hadn't even started yet. The silence after that confrontation stretched on for days, heavy and strained like a rubber band pulled too tight. At first, it almost felt peaceful. No passive-aggressive comments from Dad. No guilt-tripping from Mom. No collector calls answered in frantic whispers. But underneath the quiet, something was festering. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table filling out job applications on my battered laptop, Dad came home late, reeking of cigarette smoke and frustration. He tossed a stack of envelopes onto the counter, the sound sharp and final. "More notices," he muttered without looking at me, as if it's my fault the world's rigged. I didn't say anything. I just kept typing, the keys clicking loudly in the suffocating quiet. Dad cracked open a beer, slumped into a chair, and stared at me over the rim of the bottle. "You could help more," he said finally, voice low and accusatory. I closed the laptop gently, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm already working 2 jobs," I said calmly. "And I gave you everything I had." Dad scoffed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe how selfish I was being. "You're living under our roof, eating our food. You think that's free?" I blinked, stunned by the audacity. The roof I had helped save. The food paid for by the scraps of money I managed to keep after covering their bills for months. My hands curled into fists in my lap. "I'm not your debt collector," I said, voice tight. "And I'm not your retirement plan." Dad slammed his beer down so hard that foam spilled over the top. "You ungrateful little brat," he snapped. "After everything we've done for you." A hollow laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Everything you've done for me?" I echoed. "You mean the years of treating me like a backup plan while Brandon got to fail upwards? You mean draining my college fund without a second thought?" Dad's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "Get out if you don't like it," he barked. "You think you're better than us? Fine. Go." Mom appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with panic. "Frank, stop," she hissed, glancing nervously at me. But I was already standing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. "Fine," I said, grabbing my jacket from the chair. "I will." I pushed past them, slamming the door behind me, my legs shaking but my mind sharp with clarity. I spent the night at a friend's place, sleeping on a sagging couch, the smell of old pizza clinging to the air. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable. But it was mine. The first real decision I had made for myself in years. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. From Mom, "Please come back. We can work this out." From Dad, "If you're not back by tonight, don't bother showing your face here again." And even from Brandon, who hadn't so much as spoken to me in months. "Real nice, Lily. Abandoning your family when they need you most? Selfish much?" I deleted them all without replying. Later that afternoon, as I sat with a lukewarm coffee in a dingy cafe, my phone rang again. Mom. I stared at it for a long moment before finally answering. "Lily," she breathed, her voice raw from crying. "We're in trouble, real trouble." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. They're threatening to garnish Dad's wages. Brandon's thinking of moving out. We can't keep up with everything. Still, I stayed quiet. Mom sniffled. "You're still our daughter," she said desperately. "You still owe us." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my forehead. "I don't owe you my future," I said slowly. "I don't owe you my peace of mind. I already gave everything I had." "But we're family," Mom whispered. I opened my eyes, my heart aching but steady. "Family doesn't mean using someone until there's nothing left," I said. "It means lifting each other up, protecting each other. You stopped being family when you made me responsible for your choices." There was a long pause on the line. Then a tiny, broken voice. "What are we supposed to do?" I exhaled, staring out the window at the cars speeding past, their drivers unaware of the war happening inside my chest. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know this. I'm done fixing what I didn't break." I hung up before she could answer. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And though guilt gnawed at the edges of my mind, something deeper, something stronger took root inside me. Freedom. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, no frantic voicemails filled with guilt or accusations. For a while, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized I wasn't coming back. But hope is a dangerous thing. It was on a Tuesday afternoon as I sat reviewing apartment listings on a cracked secondhand tablet that my phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A message. From Mom. "Please come by. We need to talk. It's important." Against my better judgment, I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. But something in me, maybe morbid curiosity, maybe a final thread of loyalty, made me get up, grab my keys, and head out. The house looked the same as when I left. The peeling paint, the sagging gutters, the air heavy with old resentment. I knocked once, out of habit, then pushed open the door. Inside, the tension hit me like a wall. Dad sat stiffly at the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes like daggers. Mom paced near the sink, wringing her hands so hard they looked bloodless. And Brandon, of course, lounged on the couch, glued to his phone, not even bothering to look up. "Lily?" Mom said, forcing a brittle smile. "Sit down." I stayed standing. "What's this about?" I asked, voice sharp. Dad leaned forward, elbows slamming onto the table. "We need your help," he said simply. "As family." The words were so rehearsed they sounded hollow. "We've been thinking." Mom chimed in quickly. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could take out a small loan, just to help us get back on our feet." A laugh burst from me before I could stop it. "You want me to go into debt now?" I said, incredulous. "After you already drained my savings." Brandon finally looked up, rolling his eyes. "It's not that big of a deal," he said lazily. "People take out loans all the time. It's called being an adult." I turned to him slowly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. An adult earns their own way, I said, voice cold, not living off their sister's sacrifice while pretending it's normal. Brandon shrugged, unbothered. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. We're your family, he barked. You owe us loyalty. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. No, I said, my voice steady and rising. You don't get to demand loyalty after you've betrayed trust. You don't get to call it family when all you ever did was take. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Lily, please, we're desperate. I cut her off. You were desperate months ago. When I drained my college fund to save this house, I said. And you still let the bills pile up. Still spent money on things you didn't need. Still put cable, takeout, and Brandon's online shopping ahead of mortgage payments. The room fell silent, thick with unspoken guilt. You didn't want a solution, I continued, my voice trembling with rage. You wanted a permanent crutch, a free ticket. I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiping to a screenshot I had saved from the collector's website. The foreclosure notice officially filed. I turned the screen toward them. This, I said sharply, is the result of your choices, not mine. Mom gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Dad's face paled. Even Brandon looked momentarily stunned. You can't just abandon us, Dad said, voice hollow. I gave a bitter smile. You abandoned me first, I whispered. When you decided my future was less important than your mistakes. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my hands finally steady. I won't be taking out a loan. I won't be sending money. I won't be coming back. Mom stumbled forward, reaching out as if to grab my arm, but I stepped back. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said softly. I'm doing this because if I don't stop now, there'll be nothing left of me to save. For a long moment, no one said anything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the aching silence. Finally, Dad slumped back in his chair, defeated. Mom wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. Brandon muttered something under his breath, but stayed glued to his phone. I turned toward the door, my heart aching but lighter than it had been in years. At the threshold, I paused, glancing over my shoulder one last time. You always taught me that actions have consequences, I said quietly. It's time you lived with yours. And with that, I stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The air was cool, clean, and filled with a freedom I hadn't tasted since I was a kid dreaming of a different life. For the first time, it didn't matter if they called. It didn't matter if they begged, blamed, or broke down. I had drawn the line. And this time, I wasn't stepping back over it. The days after I walked out felt strange, like waking up in a new world where the rules had changed, but no one had given me a manual. The guilt came first, thick, suffocating, slithering into every quiet moment. Had I gone too far? Was I cruel for saying no? Was I heartless for walking away when they were drowning? Every time my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, my stomach twisted into knots. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough yet to hear the next accusation, the next desperate plea. Instead, I focused on surviving. I crashed on my friend's couch for a few weeks, working extra shifts, saving every penny like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Eventually, I scraped together enough for a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much. A cracked linoleum floor, a single window that jammed when it rained, and walls so thin I could hear the neighbor's cat sneeze. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, surrounded by secondhand furniture and the faint smell of old paint, I cried. Not from sadness, from relief. No yelling, no guilt. No late-night emergencies that somehow always became my problem. Just silence. Real, beautiful silence. I started rebuilding myself, one small piece at a time. I applied to community college, using grants and scholarships I hunted down like buried treasure. It wasn't the big university dream I had once pictured, but it was a start. I worked mornings at a diner, afternoons in a bookstore, evenings studying in the cramped corner of my apartment. I was exhausted all the time, my muscles sore, my brain fried. But for the first time, I was tired for me, not for someone else's mistakes. Every now and then, the guilt would creep back in, sharp and cold, whispering that I had abandoned them, that I had failed as a daughter. And sometimes late at night, when the world was too quiet, I almost believed it. But then I remembered. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, my dreams bleeding out onto unpaid bills. I remembered Dad barking that I was dead to them. I remembered Mom asking for more even after I had nothing left to give. Family isn't supposed to hurt you when you have nothing left. Family isn't supposed to love you only as long as you're useful. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't cruel. I had just finally chosen myself after a lifetime of being second place in my own story. A few weeks after moving into the apartment, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. Inside was a single piece of paper. House sold at foreclosure. Occupants evicted. No note, no apology, no acknowledgement. Just a cold, hard fact. They had lost the house. The place I had drained my future trying to save. The place they thought I would keep saving no matter the cost. I sat on the floor, the letter in my lap, feeling 1,000 emotions crash over me at once. Grief, anger, sadness, a tiny sliver of vindication. But mostly peace. They had made their choices. And for once, I wasn't the one paying the price. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of spite. Not to gloat. As a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is walk away, even when every bone in your body is screaming to stay. That choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And that real love, the kind that matters, should never come with a price tag. Now, every morning I wake up to the sunlight spilling across my cheap little apartment, make my coffee, and breathe. Not because my life is perfect. Not because the pain magically disappeared, but because every breath is mine. Not borrowed. Not owed. Mine. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any house, any fund, any fragile dream built on someone else's broken promises.